Welcome to Grief and Motherhood, the podcast where we explore the profound journey of navigating motherhood after loss. I'm your host, Kaitlin, and I'm honored to be your guide on this grief journey. Whether it's the loss of dreams, the challenges of fertility, the pain of miscarriage, or navigating the uncharted territory of parenting a child with unique needs, grief can take many forms in the realm of motherhood. We'll be joined by incredible women who have generously agreed to share their stories, offering a glimpse into their personal experiences with grief and how it has shaped their journey as mothers. Through raw and authentic conversations, I'm aiming to create a space where mothers can find solace, understanding, and a sense of community. Because in the midst of grief, it's crucial to know that you're not alone. Join me on this heartfelt exploration of grief and motherhood, because sometimes it's in embracing our vulnerabilities that we discover the strength to carry on. This is Grief in Motherhood. Hi, and welcome back to Grief and Motherhood. I'm Kaitlin, your host, and today's episode is a very special one. It's about the healing power of shared stories. I truly believe that storytelling is one of the most powerful tools we have in this grieving journey. When we share our pain, our journey, and our stories of loss, we not only invite others to see our hearts, but in return, we often find comfort in others' stories as well. And I know grief, it can be so isolating, especially in motherhood. It's a journey that can feel like no one else truly understands the depths of your pain. But when we open up and listen to one another, we're not alone. So in this episode, I am so honored to have a very special guest today joining me to share their personal story of loss and healing. My very dear friend, Tina, who has walked this difficult road of grief, and through her shared story, I truly hope that we can not only help you with your healing journey, but also find connection and understanding. Together, we'll be talking about how the storytelling helps us process our grief, the way it brings people together, and how we can support one another as we navigate life after loss. Before we dive in, I want to talk about the power of storytelling and healing. There's just something really incredibly formative about sharing your grief journey with others, whether it's through a podcast, writing, or just a casual conversation. Storytelling allows us to give meaning to the pain we've experienced, and it offers us just a sense of peace. And in motherhood, grief can just feel all-consuming. Walking that path, I know that with me, with my own losses, I've been able to just heal by sharing my story and connecting with other moms. Unfortunately, it's not a way that we want to know each other. It's not a path that we want to walk, but together is how we heal. And it's just a beautiful reminder that we're all interconnected through loss and love. So now I'm so excited to share my special guest, Tina. Like I said, she is a fellow mother who has experienced the awful tragedy of loss, and she has found her own path to healing through her story. Tina has become a dear friend who I met through a social community grief group, which I would also like to highlight, Forget Me Not Baskets. Welcome, Tina, and thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you so much, Kaitlin. It's truly an honor to be able to share my story, help others through this grief process, and just be able to find that community with one another and develop those friendships. Like you said, it's not a walk that any of us would have willingly chosen in our lives, but it is one that is so near and dear to my heart. And while it sounds crazy to even say, but I am thankful for this journey.
Absolutely. I know exactly what you mean. So if you don't mind, we can start by, if you want to just share your loss and what this journey has been like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my husband and I met about 12 years ago. We had a blended family. I had a daughter from a previous marriage. He had 2 older children from a previous marriage. We had really no desire to have any more kids. We were content and happy, and we were good. And about 5 years or so ago, he said, what if we decided to have a baby? And I said, what? You're crazy. Like, this was not part of our plan. And so we tried for a couple of years and we did not have any success. So we went through lots of infertility treatments, ended up through the IVF process, and we found ourselves in a position going through the journey where we went through a transfer and it did not take. So that, of course, has its own devastating pieces to it. And about 2 months later, we went through another transfer. So in January of 2022, we went through a transfer and it was successful. So we were incredibly excited. I had a normal pregnancy. I had my normal checkups. The only thing that wasn't quote unquote normal was I turned the lovely geriatric age of 35 in the medical world, and you get the AMA Advanced Medical Age Diagnosis Code. But everything was good in our pregnancy. Around 34 weeks, I went in for an ultrasound, and they were monitoring his weight and didn't really think anything of it. My daughter was only about 6 pounds, 1 ounce when she was born. So I chalked it up as I don't have big babies, because until that point, I feel like there's a level of you being naive in pregnancy because everything is, you're meeting your marks and you're meeting these metrics that your OB quantifies as a healthy pregnancy. So I went in for an ultrasound at 36 weeks. He had fallen to the 3rd percentile for his weight. And so I saw my OB the next day and she recommended that we deliver at 37 weeks. Given where I was at in my pregnancy, that was a Tuesday morning in my normal appointment. We heard his heartbeat at that appointment. The Monday when we had the ultrasound, there was great blood flow. Everything was just pointing to a small baby. So my brother got married on that Saturday and we were scheduled for our induction to start on Sunday, October 9th. And I took that Friday off work before just to get things ready because no one wants to come home to a messy home after being in the hospital for several days and just trying to get last minute things together. So I woke up on Saturday morning and I thought, I haven't felt him like I used to. And I said that to my husband, but, really didn't think a whole lot about it. Just thinking that lowering into the birth canal, this is the point in pregnancy where you're feeling really compacted because of the growth and, everything adjusting. So I woke up and went on about my day, thought I had felt him move a little bit here and there. And it wasn't until Sunday morning, it was about 5:30 in the morning when I woke up just kind of in sheer panic because I really couldn't remember the last time that I had felt him move. I went through my Bible trying to think about, what could I read to remove that anxiety and fear because I was 37 weeks pregnant. Like, why would I lose my son at this point? So we went to church, we went and had brunch, and then we came home and I got ready for the hospital because my induction wasn't until that evening. We arrived at the hospital just walking in thinking we were coming home with our son. The nurse started to hook me up and it was pretty immediate where I felt that sinking in me as she struggled to find his heartbeat. She brought another nurse in, she brought another doctor in, and they wheeled in the ultrasound machine at that point. And, Nick and I didn't need the doctor to say those words because at that point we had been through so many ultrasounds and seen his heart fluttering that we knew at that point without those words. The doctor said those terrible words and said, "I'm so sorry. Your son no longer has a heartbeat." And at that point, we didn't have any definitive answers because there was nothing that would indicate why we had lost him. So I, had the choice to stay and go through with my induction, or I could make the decision just to immediately go through a C-section, or I can make the decision to go home and come back when I was ready. And for me personally, I couldn't go home. If I went home, know that I would have ever gone back to that hospital, and that would have been detrimental for myself and for my family as well, because at some point sepsis would have started in and all of those, lovely things. But I didn't want to go through with the C-section because for a healing process physically, it would be much easier to naturally deliver. So we chose to go through with the induction, and after about 42 hours of labor, our sweet Noah was born. He was born at 5:16 p.m. And at the moment of delivery, we had our answers. The umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck 3 times. It was crisscrossed across his body twice and had what they call 2 true knots in his umbilical cord. And it's suspected that as he lowered into the birth canal, it cut off his oxygen supply. We don't have any real answers as to why that happened. The umbilical cord itself was probably about 4 feet long. It was incredibly long. And sometimes it just happened based on the movement within the womb, and as they're moving, the umbilical cord stretches. There's no real definitive answer, but going through this journey, for me personally, it's been my faith that has allowed me to walk through this with grace and finding the peace that I need. And I know that is not a place that every person who walks through this journey is in. And I know there are so many different feelings on it, and that's okay. But this is how I have survived and my family has survived. And finding my community, finding organizations like Forget Me Not Baskets, where you have this group of mothers and fathers who have been through the same struggle, whether they lost their child at 6 weeks or they lost their child full term and at birth or even after birth. So it's finding the people who have meant the world to us. And I look at it too as a believer. My husband and I started going to church in January of 2020, so right before COVID hit. And looking back, I can now see all of the beautiful plans that were laid out. We struggled to get pregnant, and I wondered why. What was taking so long? But when I look back, being able to piece together the beautiful plan that God had worked out for us, building our community, building our faith in that period of waiting. While we didn't know what was to come, I can see today why it took the time that it did. I have a best friend in my life who unfortunately has walked the very same path that I have. And looking back over the years of my life with her, I know why God placed her in my life. And just finding those people who would hold us up during the most devastating time of our life, the strengthening of our marriage in that time, for my husband and I to be able to sustain significant loss and it not break us.
Absolutely. Yeah. I completely agree with everything that you're saying. First of all, I've heard your story many times and it brings me to tears every time. So thank you for sharing it. I know it's so real and raw. And, my whole goal when I started this podcast was to be a light and show the community of women that they're not alone, and just be that hope for moms who have experienced the loss that we have. And like you said, you touched on a really great point. It doesn't matter when your loss occurred, 6 weeks or full term, a loss is a loss, and it's just hard. It's really hard. So thank you so much for sharing that part of your journey. I know you touched on this a little bit. I know it can feel isolating at times. What can you tell the listeners? What has helped you feel less alone? I know you touched on your faith, which for me also, that's played a huge part. I cannot imagine getting through anything, any of what we've been through without our faith. I know there are people who struggle because of their loss, but I will tell you, he would not allow these things to happen if there was not a greater plan. And I know that is so hard when you're walking in the middle of it. I know sometimes you just can't understand. There were months where I was just so angry at God, but he can handle it. He can handle it. And that's hard too. That's hard to realize and to come to terms with. So yeah, what else has helped you just feel less alone and less isolated during your loss?
I think one of the hardest pieces for me was learning to love myself again after this loss. And I think that because I really struggled for a long time of, as a mother, how did I lose track of Noah's movements? How did I not know something was wrong, And again, I go back to this, you're in such a naive state because you make it past your 12-week mark and you're like, okay, I'm through the first trimester. You make it to 20 weeks and you're like, okay, if my child was born today, there's a chance of survival through the NICU. Is it realistic? No, but they could. And then you get to this 36, 37-week mark and you're like, okay, I'm full term. You could come at any time. Again, back to my faith. The day that we lost Noah, there was a ministry called Sufficient Grace who came in and took pictures with us and with Noah for our family to hold on to. The photographer shared with me Psalms 139, verse 16, where it says, "You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book, and every moment was laid out before a single day had passed." And that has been something I have so deeply held on to in this process, just coming to that realization that Noah's story was already written. Nothing that I could have done would have changed what God had already laid out for him. Finding ways to lean into my grief when I feel it, and also finding ways to lean into that self-love piece and understanding that grief and joy can coexist. And I know this is something that you and I have talked about so much in our lives over the last couple of years, but finding ways to allow space for the grief that I feel, but also realizing that this joy that is to come, and I know in the depths and in those deepest moments of your grief, it doesn't feel like that's possible, that you're ever going to have joy again. But I'm here to tell you, you will have joy again, as hard as that is to see in this moment, but it can coexist. And so I think the biggest thing for me through this process of healing has been allowing that space that I need, and also finding ways to communicate that with my husband, because as we all know, men grieve so much differently than women do. So being able to vocalize like, okay, I need to have this moment of grief. I just need to be sad. I just need to cry it out and feel what I feel. I don't need you to fix it, because I think spouses and even family or friends, everybody just wants to fix your pain, and there's no fixing this. No one can fix this piece of our lives. But just being able to feel those feelings and allowing space to grieve, but also realizing that it's okay to take time for that self-love and for that self-healing. And if that's doing yourself a massage, if that's going on a walk by yourself, if that's meditating, reading your Bible, whatever it is that you need to disconnect, and just realizing that it can come at any point in time. Like there's literally no schedule for it whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that through and through. And that's hard too. Because again, any little sound or even just like a picture or a scent, I know they say can just bring up all this grief, and sometimes it's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I completely agree. Yeah, with the self-love and just taking that time for yourself and, allowing yourself that space to heal and to feel, all the feelings. And you did hit the nail on the head when you said spouses grieve differently. That's very true. I know my husband and I, we grieved very differently. We are still grieving differently, in different ways, and allowing yourself, that love and understanding that your spouse is going to grieve differently. And it's just powerful. So thank you for sharing that. It's really amazing how telling our stories not only can heal ourselves, but also others. And, that again, back to that being my goal when I started this podcast, I just want anybody else who is walking this path to know that they are not alone, because grief is a journey and there is no timeline. There is no, you need to be healed by next week or by next year. That's not how grief works. So could you tell me how your experience of motherhood has changed since your loss? I know you and I both we are lost moms, but we have also both had babies since our losses. So what does that look like for you now? How does motherhood look like for you since your loss?
So, Noah was born October 11th of 2022. We walked into our induction on October 9th of 2022. And I can tell you that who I was on October 8th of 2022 is someone who does not exist anymore. She, not even the same person that she was, 2.5 years ago. And my motherhood journey to this point. So of course I said before, we have older kids, and you hit it, we have a rainbow baby now who is almost a 1.5 years old. And my motherhood journey has changed so drastically. One comes with a lot of fear. Much as I don't want it to be fearful, it is there, because I think when you've experienced loss the way that we have, in our situation being such late term, we look at life a little bit differently, because it can be taken away from you so quickly. You're constantly living in this place, knowing what it's like to be without. And I'm just trying to navigate to still be a good mother and be present, because I want to enjoy all of these moments, because I realize everything that we miss with the loss of Noah, so trying to be present, but also trying to keep Noah a part of our life and honor him. I feel like carrying his name on, and I get to be the hands and feet of Jesus by spreading love and doing things that I imagine he would do if he was still here. So it's definitely taken a different perspective for me, because I see things differently. I'm not who I used to be. I feel personally like I have a lot more patience, because I don't let things bother me or upset me anymore, because we had the worst to us. So living in that place of gratitude, but that's not to say that there's not grief there too, because while I'm thankful for all of these things that we get to experience, especially with our rainbow baby, it is always this constant reminder of what we missed with Noah And I'm very much always looking for, okay, he would be 2 years old now. Like, what would life be like if he were here, or if we had both of them? But I also know that with that being said, in order to have Brooks, we had to lose Noah. Like, at that point in our life, to have Brooks then, we wouldn't have him then if we not lost Noah. And that doesn't mean that, in years from now, that couldn't be the case. But to have him today, this is the journey that we had to go through.
I completely agree about that. And that is something that I have struggled with. And it's so hard to fully grasp that. But I do know deep down, because Lainey was our final baby. We were done after her. And so when we lost her, we went back and forth a lot before we decided to try again.
Yeah.
And when we finally had August and he was here and healthy, that was my biggest thing. Like, we truly would not have him if we would not have lost Lainey. And so you do battle with yourself and your mind. I know I've said that a lot this episode. It's definitely not an easy path. And I know one of the things that I've been working on is just giving myself that grace to feel those feelings and think those thoughts, but also let them pass and turn to God and just, really try to understand and be thankful for the path that we've been given.
It's very hard because everybody's loss is different, and everybody's journey doesn't always end with a rainbow baby. And maybe that's because, one, that's not the season of life that they're in, or two, maybe it's just not possible, So there's this very challenging moment of making that decision to continue to proceed with that as an option, close that off. And whatever decision is for you, it's okay to not have it figured out, because it's not a decision to make very lighthearted.
Absolutely. I agree. There was a time where I was done. I was so mad. I was angry. I was never going to try again. And in my mind, we were never going to get a living baby. But, I gave it over to God and I said, please, if this is what you want for me, please allow it to happen. And it did. And I'm so thankful it did. But at the same time, I know that there are many women who do not get their rainbow baby. And again, it's not fair. It's not fair. It's hard to understand why. But I truly believe that there is a greater plan. I know for me, after I lost Lainey and I thought, this is it. I have my living boys. I'm thankful for them. But I had come to terms with what's next for us, because it's not a baby. And I was learning to be okay with that. And even though it's not what I wanted, it's something that, unfortunately, sometimes that's our path. And my heart does ache for the women who don't get their rainbow babies or a baby. Thank you again, Tina. You're a wonderful person, and thank you for sharing such a special part of your life and your journey with me and the listeners. Your courage in speaking about your grief is truly inspiring. I know there was many times during my pregnancy where I messaged you and I just sought out your guidance, because you have a great gift of speaking and just telling your story and sharing it. It's so powerful. So I truly thank you. Is there anything else you would like to share today?
I would just encourage you, that if it's on your heart, to share your story, to speak it and say it, because one, in my opinion, it's so healing to be able to share. You just never know what words someone is going to cling to hold on during these very, very dark times in their life, and to know that there are others out there who have walked in those same steps. It's comforting while it's devastating of the losses that we've been through. It's comforting to know that there is someone out there who just feels and can understand your pain, and somebody to share this walk in life with, because it's not something you want to do alone.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Thank you so much. Your story is powerful and truly hope it inspires others and also just helps heal. The healing process after loss is unique for each of us, but there's just really something incredibly powerful about shared stories like we've talked about. If there's one thing I hope all of you can take away from today's episode, it's that grief in motherhood does not have to be a solitary journey. By sharing our stories, we create a safe space for others to just feel seen and heard and understood. All of our grief journeys may look different, but in the shared space, we are never alone. If you're listening today and you're struggling with grief, I want to remind you that your story matters. It's okay to feel pain, but it's also okay to seek healing. And as we learned today, there is power in shared stories and there is healing and connection. So thank you, Tina, for being part of today's conversation. Thank you all for listening and tuning in. I hope you found comfort and strength in hearing Tina's story. And if you're ready to share your own, know that this community is here for you. Together, we'll navigate this beautiful, painful, and hopeful journey of motherhood after loss. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember, there is hope even in the difficult moment.
That's all for today's episode of Grief and Motherhood. I am also providing links in the show notes of different resources. If you'd like to share your thoughts or experiences related to this topic, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Until then, I'm sending light and love to each and every one of you.